Welcome to Trust Talk. Our guest today is Dan Abrahams, a renowned sports psychologist who illuminates the critical role of mental aspects in sports. Central to his discussion is trust, which he argues is a pivotal element, influencing both individual performance and team dynamics. Dan shares his insights on mental skills training, underlining the importance of trust for players and coaches alike. His unique approach is tailored to building trust in athletes at all levels, from beginners to top professionals. Trust, a foundational element in all sports, is as crucial in team sports like football and basketball as it is in individual sports, such as tennis and golf. Dan engages us with examples demonstrating how trust is established and maintained. Next, we explore Dan's perspective on the function of sports psychologists within premier football teams, with a special spotlight on Ajax and Manchester United. He details their journey through present challenges, emphasizing the pivotal role of psychological tactics and the cultivation of trust in bolstering team performance and overcoming obstacles. Additionally, Dan introduces his game face concept, a groundbreaking technique assisting athletes in achieving the ideal mental state for peak performance. This episode isn't just for sports enthusiasts, but is a treasure trove for anyone interested in the psychological elements that drive success and foster effective teamwork. Your host today, Severin DeWitt.
Dan, it's wonderful to have you join us on our podcast. We will cover your work in this podcast in more detail, but to kick off, can you explain what your soccer academy is doing?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm passionate about players, coaches and parents working together on the mental side of the game. And when I say the game, my online academy is soccer, football based. So the academy is very much about introducing players, coaches and parents to mental skills. There's a whole bunch of fun, animated but informative videos that help players learn about the mental side of the game, help parents have tools and techniques for themselves as parents in their role, and then it helps coaches understand the mental side of the game and helps them reinforce the mental skills that I introduced to players. So it's all about people working together on the mental side of the game.
Your expertise covers many important aspects of sports psychology, including developing individual skills, creating high-performing teams, managing pressure, and even shaping an organizational culture. With such a diverse range of skills, how do you tailor your approach to assist athletes at all levels, from beginners to elite professionals, in meeting their performance goals?
In very simple terms, I try to meet people where they're at. So in any kind of first session or any kind of first meeting, I'm asking questions. I'm trying to decipher what they feel that they need to improve upon, where they are now, the language that they use, the specific challenges that they have. It's really summed up in this philosophy of meet people where they're at. If you can do that and then start to apply specific tools and techniques to their context, you've got a very, very good chance of helping them, whatever their challenge is.
As this podcast is about trust, we'll come to more specific trust questions later on. But first about this, considering the long history of sports psychology, which dates back to the late 1800s, with pioneers like Norman Triplett, and grew significantly in the 60s and the 70s with experts like Coleman Griffith. How have these major developments, such as the inclusion of sports psychologists in the '68 Olympics and the establishment of key sports psychology organizations in the 70s, how have these developments influenced your approach to helping athletes?
Well, you're going way back there. I mean, Norman Triplett, the first sports psychology, what could be deemed the first sports psychology experiment with his social facilitation theory. Look, the best way to answer that is I think any good sports psychologist will search broadly, widely, deeply for the best possible solutions for the people that are in front of them. So whether it's borrowing from the work of Norman Triplett back in 1899 or reading the books by Coleman Griffith in the 60s, right the way through to, you know, the pioneers in the 80s that really brought sports psychology into the public attention, and today where it's very much a mainstream subject in universities, colleges and in elite sport and developing elite sport. You're just trying to look for the most relevant philosophies, concepts, constructs, approaches, tools, techniques. That's how I go about it. There's just not one way to do it. There's multiple ways, and by keeping that broad outlook and an open mind, you give yourself your best opportunity to help the people in front of you.
How does the role of trust differ in team sports like football or basketball, where it's crucial for coordinating plays and strategy, compared to individual sports like tennis or golf, where the emphasis more is on trusting one's own abilities and coaching?
Yeah, well, I would partly disagree with the question, really, because, firstly, I think trust is an absolutely vital word, whether it's a team sport or an individual sport. Do not forget that as an individual, you've got to trust your coach. Yes, you have to trust yourself, just as players in team sports have to trust themselves and their ability in their training. But in individual sports, I need to, and I played an individual sport professionally, golf, I need to trust the coach that I've employed. I need to trust the strength and conditioning coach. I want to trust that if I give them a chance to work together, that they'll work together for the best of my game. So trust still plays a part when it comes to other people in individual sports. Of course, in team sports, all those kinds of trusts exist. Trust between players and coaches, but also trust across the team is vital. So, of course, there's the extra dynamic. So the last thing to say here is, as a former professional golfer, I have quite a few people say to me, Dan, how can football or basketball be psychological? We can see how golf is, or tennis, because you're out there on your own and you've got to trust yourself. But in football and basketball, you can have a poor game but still win the game. And that's a misunderstanding. I think there's an extra dimension in team sports. As you quite rightly say, you've got to trust your teammates. And so that has to be within the coaching process. And that has to be something that you develop yourself as a player, the ability to trust your teammates. But trust is relevant no matter the sport.
You just said trust is crucial, but can you tell us how a breach of this trust could potentially affect an athlete's performance and overall well-being?
Sure. For me, it would affect their performance through the prism of mental skills. So if I don't trust a teammate or teammates, if I lack trust in my coach's messages or the activities that they're putting on, it's going to make a difference to engagement, learning, and of course performance through the prism of mental skills. Engagement as in, I'm not necessarily going to engage effectively in my training sessions. I'm not going to be as attentive. I'm not going to potentially listen as carefully because I don't have trust there. I'm not going to learn as effectively, as efficaciously, because I don't trust necessarily the messages that my coaches are giving me, whether that's a style of play, whether it's a specific skill, technique for my game or a tactic within the team. And then from a performance perspective, I might drop in confidence, going to be distracted. I might struggle to engage in self-control. I won't be as committed. So there's all these kinds of psychological skills and concepts at play all the time. And if I don't have trust, my participation, my engagement, my progression, my learning, my performance, my ability to compete might all suffer as a consequence.
I want to talk about what you call the game phase concept. As I understand it, it's a key mental technique in sports psychology for athletes across various sports to adopt specific mental states and competitive personas. So, how does game phase help athletes in achieving peak performance?
First thing to say, and to be clear, game phase is my term here, so it's a technique I've devised out of my interpretation of some empirical evidence and experiential, so my experiences. So it's important to be clear, what I'm not saying is game phase is a concept across sports psychology. It's Dan Abrahams' term or utilization of that term with relevance to competing. So a game face, as you say, is a competitive persona or an optimal mental state. I'll give you an example of a game face to illustrate, and then we'll talk about how you develop one. So at the moment, I work with somebody who might be considered one of the world's best strikers, and also another player who might be considered one of the world's best defenders. Again, I'm talking about football here. The defender has a game face of dominant and relentless, dominant and relentless. And if all those people listening in can think about being dominant and relentless on the pitch, they might picture that, even if they don't play football themselves. And then the striker has a game face of positive, upbeat Benzema. Positive, upbeat Benzema. Let me explain. So let's think about the defender's game face of dominant and relentless. This is his competitive persona, his optimal mental state. And that's drawn from him at his best. I get players to tap into their memory. Tell me about you at your best. I get them to use their imagination. Tell me about a dream game. I get them to use their perception. Who do you need to be out there when you're competing? And I put in front of them some specific set of words, adjectives, action words, or attitudes, if you like. And this player picked dominant and relentless. He said to me, Dan, I'm looking at these words, and those two words really hit home for me, dominant and relentless. So he strives to be dominant and relentless no matter what. Every action, every motion, every movement, every second. If it's going great, dominant and relentless. If it's going poorly, dominant and relentless. If he misses a chance to score, if he loses a personal battle, dominant and relentless. Now, sometimes I get players to build on those two action words. So this striker has a game face of positive, upbeat Benzema, because he picked positive and upbeat. He said, Dan, I've got to be positive and upbeat non-stop. We talk about that for 20 minutes, half an hour, what that specifically looks like. And then I might get them to choose a model player that that word model is important. They like to model themselves on, that can build on those two words. And this player said, I love Benzema, who is a French player who used to play for Real Madrid and was World Player of the Year a couple of years ago. So his game face became positive, upbeat Benzema, and he strives to be positive, upbeat Benzema no matter what. You can also add a concept on there. So some players have something like an animal, like a lion or a leopard or a cheetah. So I have a player at the moment, a goalkeeper, who is energetic, relentless lion in goal. Energetic, relentless lion. All of these are pictorial metaphors. A lot of our language, the way our brain works, tends to be metaphorical. In fact, my understanding is around about 70% of our language is metaphorical. So we love to have metaphors in order to guide us. So we're using these every single day to help players manage themselves, to manage their behaviours. That's how a game face works. I try to help every player have a game face, no matter their sport.
Very interesting, Dan. Moving to another subject, how can sports professionals and organizations work to rebuild trust in the wake of major scandals like, for example, the Russian doping controversy, which has raised serious concerns about the integrity of international sports competitions and the effectiveness of current anti-doping policies?
I think two things. I think that's obviously a very big question, and I can't speak for the Russian situation. I wouldn't for 1 second say that my expertise in sports psychology lies in the area of doping. But what I would say is I think two things come to mind here. The importance of holistic macro structures, mesosystems and microsystems across the organization. So macro structures being top-down rules, guidelines, processes, practices, policies, vision, mission statement, values. What do we do here? What do we do here? And then the meso and the micro. The meso is the team, the groups, if you like, across talent development pathways, and then the micro being the mini relationships that happen. So across macro, meso and micro, I think it's vital that organizations, whether they be governing bodies or whether they be clubs, teams, lay out what they do and how they do it. And then the second thing, they make that as transparent as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be things that they want to keep confidential because, there's competition involved globally or within a country. But I think that governing bodies, clubs, need to be really organized with what they're doing and how they do it. Macro, top-down, macro, meso, micro, and bottom-up, micro, meso, macro, and then be transparent. Produce documentation. This is what we do. This is how we do it. Here are our values, our vision, our mission statement, and here are our processes and practices, our rules, our guidelines, and thus you are giving the public the best chance to understand how you do what you do, how you go about it, and what you're trying to do.
A famous basketball coach, Phil Jackson, said, "Good teams become great ones when the members trust each other enough to surrender the me for the we." Would you agree?
Yes, I do. And far be it from me to disagree with Phil Jackson, but I think it's a really interesting landscape. I do agree with him when one takes that helicopter viewpoint. I think there's a lot of intricacy, complexity and nuance involved, in as much as I think the most effective organisations or teams are ones that still look at that, again I'm going to use this term, micro level, the one-to-ones, the individual. How can we help and how can we care for an individual? Because then you increase trust between that individual and yourselves as coaches or yourselves as organisations. So that's vital. I think the we starts with the me. It starts with that micro system. However, I do agree. And thus it is imperative from the top down to build those relationships, to show that we care, to build what we in psychology would call shared mental models. So we have an understanding of how we each see the world through each other's eyes. And that's tactically, technically, mentally. So there's a lot going on there. There has to be, it's a very complex landscape, and it's simple to talk about it. It's not easy to do. So yes, I agree, but there's also complexity there in as much we've got to get it right at the individual level, the group level, and then the macro, the organizational level.
Let's talk about high pressure situations, such as a penalty shootout in soccer or a crucial final putt in golf. How does trust in their own skills and training help athletes perform optimally, especially considering these are moments where individual performance can critically influence the game's outcome?
This is something that as a sports psychologist you're striving to help athletes a lot on. The ability to trust your technical skills and your tactical knowledge in the moment, so you're not overthinking, you're mainly just doing. And if anything, again, there's a slight paradox here in as much as I want to help players have specific attentional cues that enables them to immerse their mindset or their attention in these cues or triggers that helps them stay in that present moment, that helps their body simply take over and they just do it. And certainly my position here, I can't speak for any other sports psychologist, is there's a great misunderstanding that just do it is no thinking. It's not no thinking, it's just much less thinking. It's engaging with technical and tactical cues that are pre-prepared. There's perhaps a pre-mortem where we're thinking about a game ahead. We're thinking about what we might do in a penalty routine, what we might do, what cues we're going to have in this game ahead in order to help us to focus, or what we're going to do on every single putting green, what our putting routine is going to look like and be like in order to immerse our attention. The key players here, for me, are specific, controllable, positive cues. 2, 3, maximum 4 of specific, controllable, positive cues that players can pay attention to. I'll give you an example just briefly. Penalty kick. Cue number 1. If I'm walking up from the halfway line, let's say it's an end of game penalty shootout, knockout, I'm going to walk up with great confident body language. Is that specific? Yes. Is it controllable? Yes, I can choose to do that. Is it positive? Yes, it's something that I want to do. So strong positive body language up to the penalty spot. Okay. And then maybe when I place the ball and I walk backwards, I've picked my spot, decisive with my spot. So again, is that specific? Yes, decisive with my spot. Is it controllable? Yes, I can choose to do that. Is it positive? Yes, it's something positive to focus on. And then a third cue might be a great strike, follow through positively. As an example, off the top of my head. Is it specific? Yes. Is it controllable? You can't completely control getting a great strike. You can't guarantee that. But you can certainly have a good positive follow-through, for example. So it's pretty controllable. Is it positive? Yes, it is. So players, to trust themselves in the moment, need attentional cues. Those attentional cues need to be specific, controllable, and positive. That's how I might help somebody turn up the volume of trust. They've got something to trust themselves in rather than just go play, just go do it. That is a myth in sport. To just do it, you need tangible, specific, controllable, positive, attentional cues, so you've got something to trust in.
Then I couldn't let it, but I wanted to give you an example of recent sports events, and I wanted to know what the role of a sports psychologist potentially is. The significant challenges encountered by teams in your country, like Manchester United, and in my country, Ajax. Do you believe a sports psychologist can be a game changer in resolving these issues?
It's a really good question. And the way I would answer it, and it's in you mentioned Ajax. I work for Feyenoord.
Oh, very good.
I'm consultant psychologist to Feyenoord, so I'll answer this question with relation to Ajax respectfully, or I will just park them and just think about this. I think it would be wrong of me to say that, oh, well, employ a sports psychologist and everything would be right with the organisation. That landscape is quite complex in as much as I think any organisation like Manchester United and like Ajax, which are big sporting teams, the biggest in their country essentially, let's call them that, need good sports psychology support. There's no doubt that everybody in the organisation does psychology. There's no doubt that their managers or head coaches, the coaches, do great sports psychology within their role. Every single second. Psychology is omnipresent. It's always present, on and off the pitch, in the training ground, out of the training ground. It's always there. So they've got to do psychology all the time. And at boardroom, they've got to do psychology all the time. So it's constantly existing. It's going on whether there's a sports psychologist there or not. For me, good sports psychologists can work at different levels. And again, I'm going to use those terms: macrostructures, mesosystems, and microsystems. And think about it from that perspective. If a club is really serious about using sports psychology, then engaging good sports psychologists to work from the macro structure down, so boardroom down across the organisation, through the team, down into its talent development pathway, the academy, for instance, for me is, I think we're living in a world now where it's becoming more vital. Because what we do as sports psychologists is we help these organisations make sense of psychology. I think it's a very important inclusion in these very big organisations. I always say I'm in row Z. So whilst I would admit, or I would suggest that we are a very important inclusion, I'm not for 1 second suggesting we are the most important. And I'm not for 1 second suggesting that we can suddenly, right now, Ajax are struggling, and right now you could argue that Manchester United aren't where they would want to be. So I think we can be a part of the process that can help over the short, medium and long term for an organisation that is passionate about working holistically, integrating psychological solutions. And having good qualified sports psychologists help to do that is imperative in this day and age. We're in row Z though. We work quietly behind the scenes, whispering our messages, coming down to row A occasionally to shout those messages, then running back up to row Z. So it's not that, oh, suddenly Ajax or Manchester need a sports psychologist, because that's going back to old school. That's, oh yeah, we've got problems, bring in this. No, let's get the right systemic practices from a macro structure down in place in order to help us high perform, engage, learn, grow, thrive, flourish, all those kinds of terms across the organisation. That's the most powerful position to be in. Last thing to say here is it's understanding that these are neither quick fix solutions nor magic dust. That just because you do this doesn't mean suddenly we're going to win every game or we're going to produce the greatest players, or it just needs to be part of the fabric of the organisation, in my opinion.
That's very insightful. Thank you very much, Dan, for that. As we come to the end of our interview, I'd like to ask about your perspective on the future. What do you see as the main challenges that sports psychologists will face in the near future?
I think number one will be the continuation of striving to convince a world that is starting to release its skepticism around this discipline and starting to understand where this fits. And I think that has been the prime challenge. Where does this fit? How does this fit? Where is this placed within our organisation, our team? How does this complement what we're doing already? So I think that will continue to be a challenge. And I think if we go down to the specific challenges that sports psychologists have, it's perhaps continuing to come away from that micro system of, well, I just come in and you put me in that room over there and I just help players who are not feeling great at the moment. And it's all divorced and detached from the grass, from the training pitch, from the playing side of things. And it's also detached from the organisation as a whole. We've got to continue to get better at pushing ourselves to be on the pitch, on the court, on the course, and helping coaches to understand the importance of integrating our tools, our techniques, our philosophies on the grass, on the court, on the course, in the gym, etc., as well as helping the boardroom understand the integration of what we do within that macro structure in mind from top down. So I think there's a couple of challenges there that we have that sort of go down to the grass area, if you like, and also up to the boardroom area. We've got to continue to get better there.
Dan, thank you very much for sharing your valuable insights into the role of a sports psychologist. Your discussion on how trust in individual capabilities enhances performance and contributes to the success of trust building was enlightening. We greatly appreciate you being our guest on Trust Talk, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Severin. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Trust Talk. We hope that you found the conversation valuable and informative. At Trust Talk, we believe in the power of trust to create positive change in the world. If you believe in our mission, we would greatly appreciate your support. You can help keep Trust Talk going by making a donation on our website at trusttalk.co/donate. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us to continue bringing you thoughtful and engaging podcasts. Thank you for your support and for listening to Trust Talk. We look forward to meeting you again for future episodes.